Good morning. For years, I've been a fan of Impressionist artist Claude Monet. Years ago, when I visited the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, which has since been torn down and rebuilt, they had a large exhibit room devoted entirely to his water lily paintings. You could stand in the middle of the room and be totally surrounded by these fabulous pieces of art. As impressive as they were, what I most remember was a commentary I heard related to their creation. Monet lived at his home in France near the village of Giverny. The lilies he painted were in ponds on his property. Before he would paint, conditions had to be perfect with both the light and the pond. He could do nothing about the lighting. He'd simply have to wait until it was just right. The pond, however, was another matter. He'd have employees go out in boats and skim off offending scum and remove fallen leaves. They'd work for hours cleaning the pond to his exacting specifications. Sadly, he lacked sufficient imagination to mentally dismiss these offending realities of creation from his actual paintings. This is truly strange, at least to me, considering Impressionist paintings like his are never exact representations of nature. In short, he demanded perfection before he would paint. And as we all know, perfection is fleeting at best and never sustainable, if it exists at all. To me, perfection is simply an imaginary concept. When I heard all of this, I immediately thought he must have been horrible to work for. Since then, I've read, and I quote, he had a vile temper. As a matter of fact, he wasn't particularly liked in Giverny. He lived only for painting, and he was known to be extremely selfish. So in my opinion, if you have to sacrifice the inherent worth and dignity of everyone around you in pursuit of perfection, I wonder if it's worth it. His paintings are beautiful, without a doubt, but only those who experienced his vile nature could say if it was truly worth it, and they are long gone. For me, far too often as a society and as individuals, we willingly sacrifice the good, whatever that may be, for the perfect, which is fleeting. In fact, I believe we've lost far more by pursuing perfection as opposed to embracing the good that is all around us. There's no better example than this in Christianity. All too often, Christians like to exclaim, "The road to hell is paved with good intentions." Of course, what they mean is that intentions are insufficient. We must actually act on those good intentions and do the good we know in our hearts needs doing. Doing good, not being perfect, is clearly a primary theme of the New Testament. Jesus was called the Good Samaritan, Good Shepherd, and his message is recorded in the Gospels, where gospel actually means good news. Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestant Reformation, initially sought to be a good person. Unfortunately, his obsession with being perfectly good failed. It failed because being perfectly good was never the expectation. Doing good when it needs to be done was the expectation. For many Christians, the horrible theology of original sin makes it impossible for us to ever be good enough. We're always tainted with sin, and nothing we can do surmounts this original problem. Luther's failure to be good enough, resulting in his and the Protestant world's abandonment of Jesus' singular commandment to love God and to love one another by caring for each other. Unfortunately, they abandoned simply being good in favor of a doctrine of salvation through assertions of Jesus' perfect sacrifice or death on the cross. They killed his good news in favor of a perfect death. The Perils of Perfection destroyed the loving and caring teachings of Jesus. So how did the need perfection come to be in the first place? Ironically, there is no perfect answer, and today, only my opinions. The Christian church needed perfection to justify its theology. Early on, Catholic theology claimed Jesus was both fully human and fully God. Fully human meant that he was imperfect, so they did everything they could to embrace his divinity and his perfection. Sadly, they favored his perfection over the reality of his and our humanity. Probably all of salvation theology is based on the theological need for Jesus' perfection in order to save the world from sin. There's no room for his humanity, his failings in salvation theology. And I wonder, has this salvation theology of perfection infected all aspects of our lives? Every time we look for help or assistance, do we subconsciously expect or demand perfection from those who would help us? Let me answer that. Yes, I think we often expect for perfection from our allies. We expect something we can never offer ourselves. Tragically, this expectation of perfection endangers good yet imperfect relationships. Expecting others to see things as exactly as we see them is simply impossible and unrealistic. Let me say that again. Expecting others to see things exactly or perfectly as we see them is impossible. On the other hand, others can understand and have both empathy and sympathy for our situations, and that's good enough. Perfection is not required for an ally to be on our side. Before I go further, let me say without a doubt, this sermon will never be perfect. Perfect communication is a myth. Sharing my thoughts and feelings perfectly is also impossible. Making analogies often miss the mark. But the goal is to make a point, however flawed or insufficient the analogy might be. So here goes with an analogy which I hope will simply make a good point and possibly make things a little clearer, or at least that's what I hope. And the irony here is my analogy centers on my impaired vision. You see, I am colorblind. There are many colors I just can't see. In the color wheel that is our vision, some very different actual colors are the same colors for me. Another issue is that there is no way possible for me to tell you exactly what I can't see, simply because I'm blind to what I can't see. You will never be able to experience what I'm seeing or my lack of vision. You have to just take my word for it. But I'll give you two brief examples of my world in order for you to get a flavor of my very minor disability. Brown and green are essentially indistinguishable, as are some pinks and grays. I know this because in the second grade, I colored the bark on a tree green and the leaves brown, which for some unknown reason to me, it was deemed incorrect by my teacher. They looked perfectly okay to me, but they were wrong nonetheless. Many years later, I was shopping with a friend and I wanted new placemats for my table. I picked out one I liked and then selected 7 others for a total of 8. She laughed at me because I had gathered together a few gray placemats and the remaining ones were pink. They all looked the same to me, but she assured me they were not. Needless to say, being colorblind has caused me great frustration over the years. And Randy knows I'm colorblind. We've discussed it countless times. And in spite of that fact and his knowledge of my condition, he invariably says, "Hand me that green shirt," or "Wait till the red car passes," or "Look at the beautiful colors in that sunset." And every time he does, it frustrates and often confuses me because I have no clue which shirt is green or which car is red. And the sunset is without a doubt unremarkable. And I'm reminded once again that he's unable to appreciate my particular disability. He simply never remembers color references are useless to me. Sometimes I even get mad because he knows I'm colorblind. And yet, I must rein in my anger and my frustration because in my heart, I know he doesn't see the world as I see it, and I can't expect him to, just like I can't see the world he sees. He's actually my ally, and he often helps me with colors, and he's not my enemy, even though he slips from time to time. I simply can't expect perfection on his part as it relates to me, since we see and ultimately experience life and colors very differently. In my opinion, and with my hope, this analogy of how I am different applies to other differences other people experience as well. When we are dealing with allies who care about us and our life experiences, as opposed to dealing with other people who dismiss our differences as irrelevant or unimportant, whatever those differences might be, they are not our allies. They are not our friends. And in some cases, they in fact may be our enemies. So give an ally a break and don't expect them to react perfectly. Don't demand perfection when you are a woman and he is a man, and he forgets the everyday oppressions you constantly experience and he doesn't experience. Or when you are gay and they are straight and they can't comprehend how we hide who we are in order to protect ourselves each and every day. Or you are old and they are young and they have no clue what aging is going to feel like. Or you are trans and they are not, and they use the wrong pronoun because they forget, simply because they are human and imperfect and not blatantly insensitive to your requests. Or you are a citizen and they are politicians and they want to make things better, but they are not miracle workers and they can't make things better immediately. But they will have an opportunity to ultimately make things better, but never perfect. When we expect our allies or friends to see things exactly as we see them, we are setting them up for failure. When we demand our allies or friends react perfectly in our presence, we are setting them up for failure. When we fight among ourselves, expecting perfection from each other, we actually benefit those who truly don't care about us and who would do us harm and who in truth are not our friends and certainly not our allies. When we sacrifice the good for the perfect, we actually give up on the real world for a fantasy world that doesn't exist. Perfection is an illusion. Expecting perfection is a recipe for failure and often disaster. Believe there is good in the world and that good is truly good enough. Please be the good you know the world so desperately needs. Amen and namaste.